A couple of years ago, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis looked like an absolute political juggernaut, the future of a post-Donald Trump Republican Party, and a guy who was probably going to be president one day. But then he stepped foot outside of the bubble he'd built for himself in Florida and absolutely flopped on the national stage. Well, today, we're going to talk with a guy who predicted that this is exactly what would happen. Also, I just want to say a quick word about Hurricane Milton, which just a couple of hours ago strengthened into a unfathomably strong Category 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm recording this on Monday evening, and Milton is expected to strike Florida about 48 hours from now. I hope everybody listening to this who lives in any potential area in the state that might be affected by the storm, and it's most of the state is sort of within the cone at this point. I hope folks are taking all the precautions they can, listening to guidance from local authorities, and getting themselves out of harm's way, particularly if you're in an area that might flood. I hope everybody out there makes it through this storm safe and as unscathed as possible. Hello, and welcome to Seeking Rents, the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garcia. I am the publisher of Seeking Rents. That's a newsletter in Florida about state politics with a particular emphasis on the way special interests influence public policy in this state. That name, Seeking Rents, comes from a term in economics called rent seeking. And rent seeking is what's happening when someone with lots of wealth and influence, like a big business or a billionaire, uses that wealth and influence to get laws changed in their favor in a way that allows them to capture even more wealth and influence for themselves, usually at the expense of someone else. My guest today is Tomas Kennedy, a progressive activist and political consultant in Florida, and a guy who's been a unique kind of thorn in the side of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis during DeSantis' time as governor in Florida. Tomas has his own podcast, Why Are We Like This? And he's an absolute must follow on social media for anybody interested in state politics. He is sharp, he's funny, and you'll see what I mean in just a sec. But first, if you are someone who's interested in Florida politics, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. And if you hear anything during the conversation that follows that tickles your fancy or sparks a thought of some kind, maybe leave a comment too. Okay, let's go to the conversation with Tomas. Tomas Kennedy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Always good talking to you, Jason.
Yeah, you too. You're down in Miami, right? Are you guys worried about this storm at all?
I'm not so much worried for Miami proper. I mean, the city floods so easily. So obviously,
right.
Worried about that. People in flood prone areas, their cars or homes, but I'm
Right.
worried about the people in Central Florida. Yeah, Tampa especially. They just got hit last week. Yeah, I'm actually really worried for the people in the center of the state, in the middle of the state.
Yeah, it looks like this could be a pretty significant event. And obviously part of my thinking of like recording this now. So we're recording this on Monday, October 7th in the afternoon. And part of the thinking with doing this too is, it's going to be like an anxiety inducing next couple of days, and then probably pretty difficult few number of days after that. And so I figured, having just something to distract is maybe potentially helpful to folks as they go through stuff. So maybe we'll keep it a little light, but obviously we're all thinking about everybody and hoping for the best here. But
yeah.
I say all that, and what I wanted to start with you is something that like really pissed me off today about, did you see Ron DeSantis is refusing to extend the voter registration deadline?
Yep, I actually retweeted you on that, I believe.
oh well, yeah. You know all you need to know. The thing I think that pissed me off the most wasn't the decision not to extend. And to be clear, they should extend the deadline, right? We should make it as easy as possible for everybody to vote. But he said, and I'm going to look this up just to make sure I get it right. He said, there is nothing inhibiting for people from registering today. And like he said that literally as counties are in like mandatory evacuations, like I-4 and I-75 are parking lots right now because people are fleeing what looks like it might be one of the most powerful hurricanes of all time. And Ron DeSantis is sitting there thinking, meh, there's nothing to stop you. You really want to vote? You know how to register. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm curious. Am I out of whack with how sort of much I'm angry about this, or what do you make of this?
No, it's infuriating. It's ridiculous. I mean, this is a Category 5, 175 miles per hour. It's well above a Category 5 hurricane. I mean, they just don't have any other categories because this is unprecedented. These sort of insanely strong storms are unprecedented. And Jason, I don't even get like what is the political calculation here? Because these are like a lot of red counties, right? Like if you
Right.
want to talk about him trying to like suppress the vote, it's like a lot of like Republican red counties that are gonna get hit. I mean, the Republicans have like, close to or a million voter registration
Right.
advantage over the Florida Democrats at this point. So it's like just him just reflexively being a fucking asshole, right? In my opinion, just him being
Right.
like, no, like you should have done this earlier and
Right.
you didn't prepare, and I'm not gonna cut you some slack. I mean, I don't know how the way you see it, but I just think it's part of you actually did another tweet looking at your
Oh
account
wow,
out there, and
yeah.
you're like,
No
this
wonder I
is like
like
the type
you.
of yeah, this is the type of thing that a person who yells at kids who wear a mask during a viral outbreak and scolds children for drinking ices would do. Like it's just it goes
Right.
so hand in hand with his asshole like personality.
Yeah, yeah. I would frame it more of his like his non-human personality, right? This what doomed this guy's presidential campaign is like an inability to like experience people as another human being does, right? Like to display any sort of emotion, like to meet a kid who's got an icy and tell him a lot of calories in that kid. That's the sort of guy that in the middle of when being asked to do something he doesn't want to do with a hurricane coming reflexively goes to it's not a big deal anyway, right? As if there's not like millions of people terrified right now. It's just I think that's what pissed me off the most is just the lack of empathy. Not even and the other thing about it too is I don't know if you saw this, but he's also been whining about trying to get things changed in North Carolina and Georgia to make it easier for people displaced by Helene to vote, which, to be very clear, absolutely they should do. I don't care where you live, who you
I
vote
agree
for.
100%.
It should be as easy as possible to vote. But this guy, the way he's talking about it just is a window in his soul. He's talking about these areas are 2-1 Republicans. We got to make sure they know how to vote. Everything in his worldview is just like analyzed from like a partisan lens, a self-interested lens. No, I don't think there's like a human being on the inside of that skin.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that you've been, beating the drum on in the last couple of days was these, and not to derail the topic, but I
Please
think,
do.
there's an analogy here. It's the threat against advertisers that
Right,
are
yeah.
putting these pro amendment for these pro abortion referendum ads, right?
Right.
You actually published the letter that was sent to these outlets, these advertisers, telling them not to publish them, right, under the threat of the state. So you have a conservative, of course, using the government as a blunt instrument for their
Right.
political partisan purposes. But and correct me if I'm wrong, what I noticed the most was at the end of that letter, they basically are saying that, yes, you are protected under the First Amendment, but not to spread disinformation, which is what they claim is
Right.
in these ads. I've seen the ads. I don't think they have any disinformation,
He's
first
got
and
none.
foremost. But I'm sorry, aren't these the same people that are like all about, Elon Musk taking over Twitter so that we could have free speech? And what is misinformation? And misinformation is just, a term that the libs came up with to suppress free speech. Like they have no guiding principle
Right.
on anything. Like you
Right.
said, it's just what partisanship and whatever like method, outlet, medium, tactic they can use to advance their political power, they will
Right.
do, again, devoid of any sort of principle to anything. They
Right.
don't care. It's power for power's sake.
Right. Right. And so for folks that aren't familiar, what we're referring to here is, we spent a lot of time on the newsletter and the podcast lately talking about the sort of state campaign against Amendment 4, the amendment that would overturn the near total abortion ban that DeSantis signed last year. And so, in addition to all the stuff they've been doing to campaign against it on with public resources and sort of taxpayer funded ads and the like, last week, I think Thursday of last week, the Department of Health sent letters to TV stations that are running an ad pro Amendment 4 ad that the DeSantis team is really worried is a very powerful ad because it's a woman's personal story of how she nearly died when she had trouble getting care and how Florida's abortion ban makes it impossible for people in her situation to get the care they need. Anyway, the Department of Health sends a letter threatening stations with criminal investigations and criminal prosecution for running this ad. And they called it, oh, I forget the exact term. It was a sanitary nuisance, right? This coming from the Department of Health run by Joe Latipo, right? Like the guy who's like specializes in vaccine disinfo and vaccine smearing, right? Like who is the sanitary nuisance? Go ahead.
Specializes in being a crank.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if we want to launch an investigation into sanitary nuisances in Florida, I got a few places they could probably start. You know what I mean? But to your point, there's no interest in like intellectual consistency. There's no interest. There's no like overarching philosophy other than winning, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't even do that anymore.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Again, I don't want to, crap on, on the Florida Democrats too much, but when he is removed from, like the lackluster opposition of the Florida Democratic Party, he just gets absolutely wiped, right? So you're not even good at that.
Right. That's actually a pretty good transition into one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this show was some of your history as like a DeSantis provocateur, right? And I'm thinking of like, for instance, when he filmed that ridiculous television ad where he dressed up like a fighter pilot. Like, I mean, literally he was like cosplaying as a fighter jet pilot. And the ad came out and everybody took it seriously. And I'm including myself, like, and it was not until like you were part of some billboard that like essentially just took a freeze frame of this guy cosplaying as a fighter pilot and called him a dork. And it was like, I feel like that moment was actually pretty pivotal. Like, feel like, hey, what are we doing here? This is insane. But tell me a bit about how you've sort of gotten into that world, how one gets that job as a DeSantis provocateur, and also just like the importance of kind of busting the mythology around this guy.
Sure. Well, first of all, Jason, it's not a job. I do it for the love of the game, baby. No, I mean, I worked in immigration advocacy for a long time. I mean, I still do. I'm an immigrant myself. I'm from Argentina. I lived here undocumented for a long time. I know a lot of people who are undocumented across the state, really hardworking people, farm workers, construction workers, domestic workers, like people that are like, essential workers, as we call them during the pandemic. And, obviously DeSantis is sort of like a spawn Trump era anti-immigrant nativism that has, ripped the whole nation, but particularly in our state, it's created this climate of hatred, of xenophobia, of racism, and has just made Tallahassee a really, really hostile place, again, for immigrants.
Right.
And, DeSantis, I don't know if you remember when he first was elected governor, there were actually a lot of liberals and Democrats that were sort of like hopeful that you were like, this guy's actually a moderate, and he's actually really good on the environment.
There are a lot of hot takes that were written way too fast.
Yeah, he really cares about the Everglades, and he really, stuck it to Big Sugar,
Right.
And I knew otherwise because I had followed his trajectory as a Congress member, as a member of the House Freedom Caucus. Somebody that was really virulently anti-immigrant, for example, well before he became governor. I knew where this was headed. And, from the first session, the first thing he did was pass a really, really awful anti-immigrant bill. And obviously, he really spiraled during the pandemic. But, I just always saw him as a huge threat, as a fascist, as a neo-fascist, and as someone that needed to be opposed by all means. So, that's what I've done throughout the years, in whichever capacity, I've been able to do. And, on that billboard that you're referencing, I've always also saw him as a goofball, as an unserious person. And again, it's because he's had such a lackluster opposition on behalf of the Florida Democrats, the party. We have a lot of great lawmakers in the state, in Tallahassee, so I don't want to put them all down, but the party itself has been, I'm not the first one who says it. The party has been an apparatus that has been in dysfunction for a long time. And, I didn't see the weakness of the Florida Democratic Party at the time as, a barometer of DeSantis's skills as a politician, right? I knew he was playing on an uneven playing field. And when we put that billboard up, it's because, I think, I'm not the first one who says this, but I think that the best way to sort of like disarm authoritarian leaders like Ron DeSantis is to mock them and to
Right.
ridicule them. And when we put that billboard up, which we put across the street from the governor's mansion,
I don't.
people
If
were
I knew that, I'd
really
forgotten that. That's really funny.
people were really angry. I remember Peter Schorsch from Florida Politics put up something like, like this is, I don't know, unceremonious, this is glib,
Oh no.
disrespectful. And I didn't care,
Right.
we didn't care at all. We were like, we don't care. Like we know what we're doing, and we know that we're ahead of the ball here because
Right.
everybody knew that this guy was going to run for president
Right.
after 2022.
Right.
And I've always was a guy that from 2022, 2023, 2024, I was always maintained, and I'm on the record in several media outlets saying this guy is going to get, and excuse my language, his shit handed to him by Donald Trump in the Republican primary. And he
Right.
did, because like you
Right.
said, he's a freak. He's weird. He can't interact with people. It's not like even a substantive policy, like thing that did him in. It's the fact that he's just a bad politician. He actually, and I'll finish with this, he reminds me of, when I compare him to a politician, I compare him a lot to Scott Walker. Do you remember Scott
Yeah.
Walker?
Yeah. Wisconsin
He,
governor.
yeah,
Union
when he
buster.
like exactly. Remember when he busted the unions there, and like he was being, like puffed up by like conservative media and even mainstream media as like a presidential, prospect, and this guy's gonna go places. And I was like, he didn't go anywhere because he didn't have the risk, he didn't have the charisma, he
Right.
didn't have the juice. And
Right.
I think Ron DeSantis's political trajectory, at the end of the day, he's gonna be another Scott Walker, a guy
Yeah.
that was at the right place at the right time in his state within the right context, but he does not have the juice to
Right.
to perform at the national level.
Yeah. I think one thing we learned about him is he excels when he can control the rules of the game to the point where it's impossible for him to lose. Like I was talking about this with Nate Monroe a bit too, but like so much of his persona was built around like just bullying people in situations where they could not fight back. Like the classic example is picking a fight with a reporter when he's standing at the front of a room with a microphone and some reporter is in the back off screen shouting a question that like nobody can hear because they don't have a mic, and he could just sort of bowl right over them, and he just got nobody around him to challenge him, and just a bunch of like people applauding and laughing at his jokes regardless of whether they're funny, right? Just a classic sort of bully. And I think sort of part of what you've done is kind of expose that and take him out of that comfort. Of course, Donald Trump is really the guy that rinsed him, but you started it. You started, and probably we ought to give a shout out to Susie Wilds here for folks that know that inside story. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think
give an
important. Okay.
example. My friend Corey Hill recently went to another, I shouted his ass down at a press conference. So I gave him a taste of his own medicine.
Yeah,
But
right.
but my friend Corey Hill actually took a different approach. And I posted it, and it went pretty viral. But he recently went to a DeSantis press conference a couple months ago, and it was during the presidential primary, and he asked DeSantis, "Can you confirm or deny these rumors that you are wearing gender affirming
Right.
heels, when you are out and about campaigning?"
Right.
And DeSantis was just like so like like he kind of chuckled to himself, like malfunctioned, and was
Yeah,
like,
right.
and moved on. But like that's the kind of shit that you have to do to him, because again, I'm not a Trump supporter by any means. I despise Trump. But Trump can be kind of quick-witted. I think if you would have said something like that to Trump, he would have had some like remark back.
Yeah.
But DeSantis just does not have the juice. And like you said, he only can perform in tightly
Right.
choreographed, managed, environments. I used to tweet all the time during the presidential campaign a line that I stole from Chris Christie. He used it against Marco Rubio once. Ron DeSantis was the boy in the bubble. He was the
Right.
boy in the bubble, and outside of that bubble, he just malfunctioned.
Yeah. The other thing you kind of alluded to too is like how none of his like the reputation he developed in Florida really matched like his actual record on so much stuff. And so I want to go back to the sugar thing because, you know, I think you can make a case. I mean, obviously the main reason he got elected governor was Donald Trump support him. That's like got him through the Republican primary and got him into a position to win. But probably the second most important thing was he was seen as anti-big sugar, right? Like, and the sugar industry spent an awful lot of money both for Adam Putnam in that primary, but also for Andrew Gillum, the Democrat. That
Right.
he was definitely the anti-sugar candidate in that race. But then once he got to be governor, he's really only been anti-sugar in one very narrow way, where it comes to like building a reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee. Anything else sugar wants, they seem to get. And I'm thinking, and this might speak to your just sort of like this falls into his just he's not interested in anything that might have to do with immigrants. But when sugar was under fire for its burning practice and the public health problems caused by all its cane burning, Ron DeSantis signed a law that protects them from lawsuits over this. This was a literal gift to Big Sugar, and this was allegedly the anti-sugar governor signing it. Yeah, I'm sure you know about that issue, but tell me about it. Tell me about sort of your experience with him on that front.
Look, it goes back to what we were saying about his position on the voter registration deadline being extended. I just think it's part of his reflexive tendency to be an asshole, right? And the only reason, in my opinion, that he was anti-sugar in that election was because, as you noted, Adam Putnam, the former Commissioner of Agriculture, who was running for governor at the time and was the favorite to win until that Donald Trump endorsement of Ron DeSantis for governor in 2018, was the big sugar candidate, right?
Right.
And then, as you noted, Andrew Gillum, whether you like him or not, was also a defender of the sugar industry in a lot of ways. So I think he just reflexively backed himself into a corner of being like, fuck these guys, they're the sugar industry. They're financing all of my opponents, I'm going to stick it to them. And it also happened to be a pretty smart populist position to take at the time, right?
Right.
I mean, but as you know, once he was in Tallahassee, he was a friend of the sugar industry, like most politicians in Tallahassee are. I mean, the person that ended up replacing Adam Putnam as agriculture commissioner, Democratic agriculture commissioner Nikki Fried, also a huge friend of the sugar industry, and you can record on that. And now she's the chair of the Florida Democratic Party. So again, I'm not trying to crap on people, but the sugar industry is very powerful in the state, control a lot of politicians, a lot of political activity in here. And Ron DeSantis, as you've noted with clear-cut examples, has not been an enemy of Big Sugar. Yeah. He's taken their money, and then he's later crap on them publicly as a sort of like, populist posturing, during campaign season, which is pretty smart of him. That's one of the smartest things he has done, in my opinion.
Yeah. Two things there too. One, you are absolutely right. Nikki Fried, as agriculture commissioner, did almost as much as Ron DeSantis to protect the sugar industry from any sort of accountability for its sugarcane burning. I mean, sugar gives money to an awful lot of Democrats. And, this is not being beholden to Big Sugar is a bipartisan issue in Florida. There are not nearly enough legislators or policymakers in either party that are willing to stand up to that industry in particular. And the other thing, for my money, one of the most fascinating things to watch is going to be, we're going to find out pretty soon, not until right before the election, but pretty soon, who's been giving the Republican Party of Florida all this money to run ads against Amendment 3 and Amendment 4. So the Amendment 3 is the one to legalize marijuana, Amendment 4, the one to overturn the abortion ban. Because of the way Florida has set up its fundraising reporting deadlines, which they have weakened, we don't actually see that money until like days before the election. But I suspect you're going to see an awful lot of sugar money in there. And so if that's right, we're heading into a session now where the guy coming into the guy who's going to take over Senate president is a guy by the name of Ben Albritton, who the one thing everybody talks about in Tallahassee is how this guy is the ag industry. This is the closest like person to the ag industry we've had in a leadership role in Florida politics in a long time. So it seems very likely that there's going to be a big sugar related push, probably around Lake Okeechobee, but maybe around, some other issue, could be rock mining or something like that. And will Ron DeSantis actually stand up to him again at that point? That, for my money, that'll be one of the more fascinating things to see. Yeah, I mean, you got any predictions?
I mean, I don't think so, because I feel like the governor again has lost so much juice in Tallahassee. I mean, even last session, like Pasadomo, the Senate president, stood up to him on some of these more idiotic culture war bills. For example, this this ban on flying flags at government buildings and stuff like that. I mean, bills like that, I think she came out and literally said, the Florida legislature, like the Florida, Republican caucus in the legislature is not the Republican Party of Florida, which
I
I
wish
think
they'd found that out a couple of years ago, but
I was shocked. I was like, whoa, really? It shocked me.
yeah. If only this woman had been Senate president.
But look, I worked in the, I was an aide for Jose Javier Rodriguez about 9 years ago. I worked in the legislature. I mean, obviously I work, in Tallahassee during session as a sort of like progressive lobbyist, of sorts. So, I talk to people on both sides of the aisle, to be honest. And people, obviously the Democrats are sick of him, and they've always been sick of him for the most part. But the Republicans have been sick of him, right? I mean, they, like you said, a lot of them were just bullied into submission. But I don't think he has the same. He's lame duck, first of all, and I don't think he has the same juice that he once did to sort of like ram his agenda through, at least on the culture war issues, like he used to. Yeah. That being said, Tallahassee is a pro corporate, pro big business entity, so that's always going to continue. What I'm actually more interested about as a person who's pro immigrant and wants Florida to be a welcoming place for immigrants is, will we see a stop? I don't know if a rollback, because the legislature never rolls back or repeals bills, but will we see a stop on these anti-immigrant bills, that have exacerbated worker shortages, right, that have disrupted supply chain, that have caused higher than average inflation in the state of Florida? I mean, you had a report from the Office of Economic and Demographic Research that came out in January of this year saying that demographic trends are not good for the Florida economy. We had young people moving out because of the cost of living crisis, right, retired boomers moving in who are not in the workforce, and death rates are overtaking birth rates.
Right. That's
not good for, revenue income, the state coffers, the workforce, the labor shortages. And this report from the state of Florida literally has a page that says net migration is needed into the state, completely contradicting the rhetoric right, of state officials. So right, I am interested. Are they going to do something to try to, alleviate this or fix it? Maybe roll back their E-Verify provision that they passed in 2023 that has, destroyed, among a lot of different things, our agriculture sector, for example. That I'm very interested to see what they do.
Maybe stop turning nurses into Border Patrol agents and stuff like that, and making hospitals pry into people's immigration status. One place you might see.
Let me on that note. Sorry.
Yeah,
but
go.
I was actually at the border in Eagle Pass, which is a town. Yeah, I went to the border 3 times this year. To help process migrants and help people there. As part of these delegations. And I was in Eagle Pass. It's by the Rio Grande. There were so many Florida Fish and Wildlife vehicles there. I'm talking pickup trucks, vans, airboats, different boats, But when I'm telling you, Jason, I'm not telling you that I saw a dozen of them. I saw dozens, and dozens and dozens of them just everywhere. And I was like this guy is playing fast and loose with, all types of Florida resources, again, for, as you said, this just stupid partisan posturing.
Right. Just trying to build up this tough guy image, when at this point I think everybody knows that the there's not actually a tough guy under there. One thing I wonder that could come, and this speaks to your point of how he's just reflexively anti-immigrant, and one of the bills that passed this past legislative session that was bipartisan. And I don't know it well, so I don't know the full arguments on it, but it was bipartisan, and it would have made it easier for essentially farming companies to build housing for migrant workers on their property. Again, we claim, JD Vance is out there, claiming that immigrants are driving up the cost of housing. So, hey, here's a solution. If you really think that's true, it's not really true. But if you do, you would probably want to encourage this sort of thing. DeSantis vetoed that bill, right? Even though, again, I think it passed. It feels like there's probably one nativist legislator or one or two that voted against it. But if it wasn't unanimous, it was close to unanimous. I wonder if you could see something like that come back.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this is not housing for undocumented people.
Right, right.
These are for H-2A worker visas. Right. They're here, they're legally allowed to be here. They're here for a purpose, and their employers have paid like a fee for them to be here,
Right.
because I believe they have to pay like a 20% like, fee basically to
Right.
import, like a visa worker in here, just, basically as a penalty for not hiring a quote unquote American worker. So like
Right.
these are not people that are like getting
Right.
like a handout, or like, whatever these people, these right-wing people think, like these are like legally allowed workers who are here because they need to fill a role that like American workers are just like, there's no demand for it.
Right.
It's just
Right.
so absurd, man.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and then we're going to scream about inflation. Well, like making it harder to find like workers that actually like help like pick crops and stuff like that. Like, I mean, there's this is going. We're
Yeah.
going back to no
Yeah.
intellectual consistency.
And I tweeted about this, and we actually sent a mailer about it recently to three Florida House
Oh
districts.
yes, I was going to transition to this. This is perfect.
Yeah, let's get it. Let's get on
Let's
it.
do it.
There was a CVS report which we quoted in these mailers that we sent it to three Florida House districts in Central Florida in your neck of the woods. Again, the growers, the agricultural sector, the agricultural business leaders in the state are not people that like to stick their neck out and talk shit about the governor or the
Right.
legislature, right? Like they're not known for their political courage, right? I mean, they're just there to make a profit and, to run their businesses. There was a CBS report recently that was super interesting. They had these growers saying, listen, like these anti-immigrant laws that we've already touched upon, I don't want to repeat myself, but that are again exacerbating these worker shortages that are already acute in the state and stressing supply chains. They are making it impossible for us to find workers. Like
Right.
they are destroying the domestic labor pool that we depend on to harvest and grow crops in the state. And there was a incredible quote by one of the growers. He said, if this keeps up, there's not going to be a strawberry, a jalapeno, a watermelon, an orange that is grown in the state,
Wow.
because we are going to have to import these historically grown produce in an ag state like Florida. We're going to have to import it because, again, we don't have the workforce
Right.
to do this anymore. And obviously there's other stressors, right? It's not just the anti-immigrant laws. There's like fungi, like all types of fungi outbreak that have been destroying the orange crops across
Right.
Florida for years. There's, pesticides that are not as effective as they once were. There's natural disasters, extreme weather events that are hitting the state year after year with more frequency, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just the anti-immigrant laws, but this is stuff that, it's very hard to control, right? What I just named. What
Right.
we definitely can control
Right.
is whether we pass stupid, destructive laws or not, and on
Right.
top of that, we're doing that. It's very frustrating. And yeah, I would, if you can link that CVS report, or maybe link, an
Absolutely, we will.
article to our mailers, it's super interesting. I really encourage any and all Floridian to watch it.
Yeah, we're gonna link a few things, but absolutely we're gonna link that, and we're gonna link the cosplay fighter pilot billboard image. So those two things will definitely be there for folks that haven't seen them. Yeah, I want one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about this, and these are mailers that were sent by the Florida Immigrant Coalition, right? And then
Those specific ones, yes.
yeah, yeah, and they were sort of attacking a handful of Republican legislators in key districts, key swing seats that voted for that. Well, a couple of bills, but the one that I was most interested in was that barbaric bill we spent a lot of time talking about this year that essentially protects companies that refuse to provide drinking water to their outdoor employees. And one reason I was actually like thrilled to see someone focusing on this issue, and I'm going to lead to a question here, but like when we were covering that, and when I say we, I mean myself, but also like reporters all across the state were really digging into this issue. And, some of the best political reporting this year happened around that bill where, McKenna Schuler of the Orlando Weekly finding text where like the big business lobby is literally demanding lawmakers pass that bill, right? Like the sense of entitlement was just like shocking. But there was like a real backlash from readers in a way that, I haven't seen around other issues. There was a lot of discuss, like even like Republicans, like there are folks that will send me notes that they don't agree with all my hot takes and they like to let me know they don't agree. Even those folks were kind of like, this is gross. We shouldn't be doing this. People sort of like rightly got that we wouldn't do this to our dogs. Why on earth would we do this to other human beings? Right. And so I say all that. I'm like 100%. I'm so glad that someone is elevating this issue. And to that end, I'm curious why you chose to focus on this and what sort of, speaking of House Bill 433, what kind of impact have we seen from that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's horrible. When I was undocumented, I worked construction for a few years. I honestly never want to do it again because I just don't have the physicality for it.
Right.
But my dad is a construction worker. So, it's personal to me, first of all. I know a lot of people, doing the work that I do that work outdoors in these really, really difficult jobs. And like you said, I think just for people, it just makes sense. It makes sense to provide the very basic things that, again, labor unions and farm worker groups have been lobbying for, which is, as you said, access to drinking water on the job, access to proper shade on the job. And I believe it was when temperatures hit 95 degrees Fahrenheit to have a 10-minute rest break every hour.
Right.
Like, that just makes sense. That's a very, very minimal demand, request, whatever you want to call it, right? And I think anybody can go outdoors on most Florida days of the year
Right.
and understand, just from being outdoors and being hit by a barrage of humidity and heat,
Right.
that this is like not, like this is not an environment that, people working either construction or, in agriculture can withstand without some basic protections like the one we asked, right? Like, I just think it just makes sense for most people. And it is barbaric. It is barbaric what they did in Tallahassee. And again, it's because they are pay to play,
Right.
As you noted, the Florida Chamber of Commerce and a myriad of satellite groups associated with them were the ones that were, as McKenna Schuler from Orlando Weekly noted, we're texting the staff of Paul Renner, the Florida House Speaker leader. They're texting her, heat cannot die. Like, you have to pass these heat stress protection preemptions. You have to pass these ban on these protections to the Florida House Speaker leader.
Right.
And then the Florida Chamber of Commerce, they put out a progress report type of thing, on elected officials. And then, to your average listener, that sounds stupid. Like, oh, like, who cares? It's just a little progress report. No, like, that progress report later is used, to determine who gets what campaign donations.
Right, exactly.
Who the Florida Chamber is going to commission a mailer like the one we just sent out, or like a radio ad or a TV ad attacking them. So elected officials get scared when the Florida Chamber, like, puts their crosshairs on them. They put out this progress report and they told elected officials that their vote on this heat stress protection ban was going to be double weighted. So if you voted for the protection, for the ban on protections, you get double the good score. Against the ban on protections, you get double the negative score. And again, this is stuff that later determines your feasibility on getting elected or reelected, right?
Right.
So I just think, as you noted, it was really illustrative on how things work in Tallahassee, how pay to play everything is, how, like, brazen the special interest groups are in their meddling and dictating of the process. And the saddest part of all is how craven and cowardly a lot of these elected officials are. I'll stop my rant by just noting this. There was actually a bill that was toothless, actually. It didn't have much enforcement, to pass heat stress protections for workers in the Florida legislature a couple of years ago.
Right. A statewide bill. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was unprecedented because it got a hearing on a committee, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that doesn't happen a lot of times for, like, liberal progressive bills. And it was because a state senator from Miami-Dade named Ana Maria Rodriguez, who's a Republican, was pushing that bill, with We Count and other groups down south. And she got it heard on committee, got a committee hearing, and then right after that hearing, she fucking pulled the bill and never talked about it again. And it's because, I assure you, she got a call from folks at the Florida Chamber and the big construction developers, etc. And they were like, no, what are you doing? Stop that. And again, she was craven. Like, it is what it is. She was craven, and she was like, I'm not doing this. I don't want to make enemies of, like, big business.
The one of the the tragedies of that is, well, first of all, that bill, after that bill got its hearing, and this was a bill that would have, like you said, created some statewide heat protection standards without any enforcement mechanism, so no actual teeth to them, but just at least like putting it in law. A lobbyist for the Florida Home Builders Association, so this is like Lennar, Mattamy Homes, Pulte, those kinds of companies, assured all its members that we spoke to the bill sponsor. It's not going to move again. We've taken care of this, right? And then lo and behold, a couple of years later, Ana Maria Rodriguez, the person who sponsored that bill, cast and I mean this, the pivotal vote that passed 433. If she had voted against it, it would have died. She could have stopped it from happening, the bill denying heat protections this year, and she chose to vote for it. I mean, that's just, I mean, again, to the point of those texts where the demanding to pass, it's pretty clear who works for who up there, and it's not the business lobbyists working for the legislators, right? And also, just to bring this full circle with tough guy Ron DeSantis here, he of course very quietly signed this into law and then immediately began running away from it. Like he was asked a few days later, yeah, why'd you do this? He was like, oh, it wasn't anything I asked for.
Didn't originate from my office.
Right. Well, if only you knew somebody who could do something about it, right? Just no toughness when it actually matters. The last thing I wanted to ask you, sort of similar to this, is I think tell me, Florida Student Power sent some pretty aggressive mailers after Carolina Amnesty too, right? Tell me about sort of what prompted that and why Carolina Amnesty.
Yeah. Florida Student Power is a great group. It's an advocacy youth group made up of students. I don't work for them, but I'm sort of helping them out on some political ads and pieces. And yeah, they sent out a mailer with Carolina Amnesty mugshot because she was recently arrested on felony forgery charges. And I have to say, as a an immigrant advocate, I do have to note this. This was not too long after she went to the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, and took a video of herself right in front of migrants being apprehended, just for, crossing the border, without authorization, but they were all in handcuffs, treated the, border patrol treatment that unfortunately they get. And she was, saying that these people are criminals and we have to close the border and we have to secure the border. So the migrants are criminals, a couple of months later, felony forgery charges, misusing her public position in all sorts of ways to benefit herself and her businesses and her family. So, I think the intent of the mailer is just to inform. We sent it to about, I think, 3,000 households in her district that, your representative is unserious, unqualified, and quite frankly, and I hate to put it in these terms, but a criminal, and you shouldn't re-elect her. She's not serious. She's not representing you. She's not representing your interests. She's making a mockery of her position, which, by the way, she gets paid for by the taxpayers.
Right. I should probably, for like liability purposes, throw in accused criminal there, but yeah, point well taken.
Indicted. You can say indicted.
Yeah, there you go. We can settle that. We'll edit that out. No, I'm kidding. By the way, I don't know if anybody caught this, if it showed up on the audio, but my phone alarm just went off, like the statewide alarm, because of, there's a giant Category 5 hurricane out in the Gulf of Mexico right now. But again, Ron DeSantis says there's no reason to extend voter registration deadlines. It's not like folks have things going on today. One last thing about amnesty, and part of the reason I wanted to bring it up with you is, that's one of the closest, theoretically, that should be one of the closest state house races in all of Florida. And just like a couple of days ago, I was pulling TV ad buy records in Orlando. I was mostly looking for, the Republican Party started advertising for Andrew Bain, the prosecutor DeSantis appointed after he suspended Monique Morell up here. But as well, I was doing that, I saw that House Republicans had bought ads in, I think it was six state house races in this area. Basically, every swing state up here, plus a couple that, like, if they really are swing races this year, then it seems like it's a tough year for Republicans. But nothing for Carolina Amnesty. They're not doing any advertising for her whatsoever. And I'm not curious what you make of that. Like, I'm wondering, I would think that probably means they think that's a lost cause. I can't envision a scenario where she's so far ahead that they just decide it's not worth it. But I don't know. You got any insights into that?
Not like, just assumptions, but my assumption is, look, I think she's obviously disliked within the caucus, kind of like Fabian Basabe, right, in Miami Beach. Like one of these people. They're like, if we lose them, it might be better for us.
Right.
And then the other
We got
thing,
84 votes. We can shed a couple of losers.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that I think that 2022 was not like normal, right? Like it was an
Right.
anomaly. Like I don't think that Florida, is like a 19-point spread loss for the Democrats. Like
Right.
I just think it was a low turnout year, for a party that was disorganized and uninspired with bad candidates, and then DeSantis was, flushed with money and turbocharged because it was right after the pandemic.
Right.
I think the context on a presidential on this presidential year is going to be different, and there's going to be a correction of those numbers. Is it going to flip the state blue or whatever? I don't know. Probably not, because again, I don't think the Democrats are there. They have a lot more work to do, maybe, but probably not. But I think there's going to be a correction of those numbers, and that correction is going to basically result in some down ballot victories for the Florida Democrats. And I think that they are going to probably flip like a couple of state house seats. Again, probably Fabian Basave, I think it's HD 106 in Miami Beach. And I think this Amnesty district is probably going to be flipped because it was a strong pro-Biden district, and it is a district that leans blue, right? Just like Tom Keene flipped that other state house seat in the Orange County, Orlando area. I think you're right on the money in that. I think the Republicans see that writing on the wall, and they're just much more interested in, taking some losses. They know they have a strong majority. They know they can even lose that Amnesty seat and the Fabian seat and still be in a super majority, right? Because you would need to flip at least 3 more seats, I believe, 3 or 4. So I think it's cutting their losses, and they're saying like, look, we're probably going to lose this. So let's reinforce the seats that we need to win and to keep the super majority, even if we lose 1 or 2 or 3 here and there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's what I like. That's how I would think about it if I was their strategist, but who knows?
Yeah. Well, we'll see soon enough. Listen, I hope you stay as relatively unflooded down there as possible. I hope the same for everybody listening. Maybe we'll have you back on after the election or something. We can sort of walk through some see how the work you did if it paid off or not.
Fingers crossed. I hope so. And yeah, you too, Jason. Stay safe and dry.
All right. Thanks, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you again to Tomas Kennedy for joining. Be sure to check out his podcast, Why Are We Like This? It's a fun one. I've been on it. And also follow him on social media. I'll be sure to include his handles in the show notes. Right alongside a link to that billboard about the dorky governor cosplaying as a fighter pilot. And if you've listened this far, I hope that means you've enjoyed it and you're interested in the material. So again, please make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons and leave a comment with some thoughts on the show or feedback or even stuff you'd like to see us, guests you'd like to see us have on, or topics you'd like to see us cover in future conversations and podcasts. All right. Thank you again. And one more time, I hope everybody stays safe and unscathed during Hurricane Milton. And we'll talk again on the other side. Take care.